It lays the predicate and the foundation for the development of a weather satellite that will permit man to determine the world's cloud layer and ultimately to control the weather, and he who controls the weather will control the world.
If you think life on the orbiting asylum is alarming and precarious now, you won't like what the coming weeks and months will reveal. Let's start with this. Dangerous heat bursts have been spiking temperatures across the U.S. as people sleep. So the report asks, what are they? Question mark. That's from the UK Independent. The report continues, heat bursts can bring dangerous winds and a rapid 20-plus degree temperature spike in just a matter of minutes. The report then says it also brings strong, dry winds like a desert hurricane, end quote. Stop there. Question, with the exception of the power structure bought and paid for so-called weather experts, does anyone that is still firing on all neurons actually believe that middle-of-the-night desert hurricane heat bursts that come out of nowhere in a matter of minutes, according to the report, are just random acts of nature? Really? Never mind the fact that our atmosphere has long since been a battleground of experimental weather warfare operations, a climate engineering weather warfare Manhattan project for over 75 years being ramped up all along the way. So in summary, the so-called heat bursts with so-called dry desert hurricane winds from nowhere are signature ionosphere heater frequency transmission consequences. Frequency transmissions that are core to covert climate engineering operations, aka weather warfare. So-called scientists, so-called weather experts, so-called meteorologists that deny the shockingly inarguable climate engineering atrocities are either criminally ignorant of the field of study in which we are taught, trained, and programmed from birth to blindly believe they are experts, or they are lying. Take your pick. Always consider, always remember that there is no legitimate discussion of climate anything from any perspective without first and foremost acknowledging and addressing the climate engineering, aka weather warfare, core factor in this equation. How about this proverbial flaming arrow of accountability? Forward a link to the dimming to all such so-called experts. Openly CC as many other aware and awake activists and individuals as possible and ask the so-called weather expert recipient to explain why and how it is that they are pretending climate engineering operations aren't actually raging in our skies with far past catastrophic consequences. More pulling back on the curtain of the so-called climate science community of deception, delusion, and insanity. Study projects that increasing wildfires in Canada and Siberia will actually slow global warming. That's from phys.org and other sources. Stop there for a moment. This is exactly what I and Geoengineeringwatch.org have tried to sound the alarm about for the entire 16-year length of our existence. That so-called academia was actually advocating for what they perceive as a benefit of intentionally incinerating northern latitude forests to provide temporary toxic cooling of the planet. And now it's being admitted to because the elephant in the room is simply too big to hide. From this report, a new University of Washington-led study projects that the next 35 years will see increasing boreal forest firestorms that will actually slow warming by 12% globally and 38% in the Arctic. Stop there. Before I cover a few more excerpts from this so-called science report, stop and consider the level of insanity we're looking at here that's actually covertly trying to promote the intentional incineration of northern latitude forests to provide temporary cooling of the planet, and giving statistics talking about in 35 years on the current trajectory, no one will be here by the end of this decade, statistically, mathematically. And I don't care who doesn't believe that. I don't care. That's not my task to convince those that don't want to face the truth. That's a statistical, mathematical trajectory. Look at the stats right now today. 90% insect population crash around the globe, terrestrial and aquatic. 75 or 6%, depending on the study, wildlife collapse in the last 40 years alone. 90% collapse of fisheries, pelagic fish populations, the food fish, crops are collapsing around the globe. And none of this takes into account collapsing ozone layer, nuclear anything and everything, which is going to rear its head. Again, many times I've cited 442 nuke plants around the globe. As society collapses, they will go into meltdown. And we have so-called scientists like this pretending that, hey, if we just keep burning our forests, we can keep things cool down for another 35 years. Total insanity. These people should be locked up. They then say, because the aerosols in smoke brighten clouds and reflect sunlight, summer temperatures during fire seasons drop in northern regions. As long as you're not having to breathe this and the sprayed geoengineering toxic aerosols that are being dispersed on top of these smoke canopies, which we've already proven with time-lapse film footage in the documentary The Dimming, for free on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org, they continue that the drop in temperatures leading to reduced sea ice loss in the polar regions and cooler winter temperatures. This effect, despite the warming effects of the fires themselves from factors such as soot that falls on the ice. This is the epitome of cut off your nose to spite your face. This is what the so-called climate science community is peddling. They then say it's important to remember that these increasing fires still have a lot of negative effects. Really? You think? I would have never believed that for human health and for forest biodiversity. Like the forests never grow back? How about that? They're not growing back. Already proven. And if the fires continue to increase, they say eventually they could burn through the forests and the trend could reverse. Could, may, might? I don't have the words for the so-called science community. They are literally criminal accomplices to the controllers that are behind all of it and covering up climate engineering. All of them, with very few exceptions, and the exceptions know who they are. Final statement, the study found impacts far from boil forests. Of course they did. The smoke cools temperatures across all seasons from the Arctic down to the latitude of Northern California at 40 degrees north. That's right about where I'm at, by the way, on the east side of Lake Shasta. The fires also push tropical rains further south because tropical precipitation depends in part on the temperature difference between the hemispheres. How many news reports do you see that are stating the fact, well, they're chemically cooling so much of the U.S. right now, again, the most populated portions of the U.S., which they've been doing since about 2012, wave after wave of manipulated moisture blown into the widest possible region, chemically nucleated, so we get baseball, softball, and now cantaloupe-sized hail, destroying everything, whiplash temperatures up and down. But what's going on in the perimeter of that, like where I'm at in Northern California, where it's so hot, it was 90 degrees at about midnight, just before midnight in May, here in the formerly lush forest of Northern California, and everything is imploding here. Trees dying everywhere, animals are behaving incredibly strangely. In fact, this week, just this week, of all my years in the forest, nothing like this has ever happened to me. I was returning home, pitch black, light on an e-bike, returning from some tasks in the forest, and I was hit broadside by a buck at full tilt, blew me off my bike, and I hit hard. The buck vanished into the darkness. I've never had anything like that happen. I don't think it was an act of aggression. It was simply an act of panic of some type. I've never had anything like this happen. All I saw out of the corner of my eye was the velvet-covered horns. They still have velvet on their horns right now. Thankfully, they would be much sharper otherwise. It hit me broadside, T-boned me, full tilt. Never had anything like that happen. I'm in recovery mode now, but I will be watching much closer. Animals behaving very strangely. And as I stated last year, so hot in Northern California that I found one of our local does dead with the fawn half-birthed because it was too hot. Almost no birds here, no insects. People going about their lives as if nothing is wrong, and that is not unique to here. And we get the occasional comment from people somewhere that are living in their own little delusional bubble that, oh, it's wonderful where they're at. Everything's normal. Everything's fine. Nothing to see here. A lot of people live under that kind of delusion, but that is not the planet as a whole. Whatever bubble they may be in, that is not reflective of the world as a whole. So with all that in mind, again, about using forests as a means of geoengineering, as a means of solar radiation management to provide temporary cooling, please search and view Wildfires Serve Geoengineering Agenda, and you will see shocking data to back up everything just outlined here, and you will understand just how desperate and dangerous those in power are. Next headline from AccuWeather. Americans warned to stay out of the sun in 16 states this weekend. 16 states stay out of the sun. They say the UV index runs on a scale of 1 to 11. That's a totally fictitious scale. UV readings are totally fictitious. They say it expected that UV levels will continue to increase. Of course they will, because the ozone layer is collapsing. And climate engineering is the core causal factor, not hairspray cans, climate engineering, massive aerosol dispersions, somewhere in the range of 40 to 60 million tons annually, as our testing proved, and the frequency transmissions, all of which are destroying what little is left of the ozone layer. We are on the cusp of functional collapse right now. No ozone layer, no people. And how many reports have we said, hey, ignore that burning sensation of the sun. The ozone layer is actually getting better. Go to sleep. Nothing to see here, right? Truman Show. That's where we live. Truman Show. More headlines. Hundreds of fires burning across Western Canada. Again, more of the intentional incineration of boreal forests to provide temporary toxic cooling of the planet. How many actually know how much Canada incinerated in 2023? Here's how much. About 72,000, not acres, square miles. 72,000 square miles, bigger than the states of Florida or Georgia. How many think that that can continue when you have these other so-called scientists saying, in 35 years of doing this, we could have a problem? Really? I don't know who's doing their math, but it's someone who never went to school. Geoengineering operations are core to the boreal forest incinerations. I want to make that clear. Search the engineering wildfire section on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. Climate engineering is setting the template for these fires to burn with such ferocity. It's a complex equation. All the data is there. The source of ignition, separate subject. Too many people go down that road. That is not the core of this equation. The core is what is setting the template for these forests to burn with such ferocity. Any moron with a match can start a fire. That is not the core to this problem. Again, search Wildfires Serve Geoengineering Agenda, one of our most important reports. Please help us share that report. Help us share that report with everyone everywhere that should care about our forests burning to the ground. That is the most important report on that issue. Wildfires Serve Geoengineering Agenda, geoengineeringwatch.org. Also from phys.org, a warming planet is poised to get even hotter, forecasters warn. How can it not? How can it not get hotter when the planet's life support systems are completely breaking down, when we're burning 100 million barrels of carbon fuel a day, 26 million tons of coal a day, and know all that emission doesn't float off into outer space somewhere? That's a very simple concept. Of course, it's trapped here. And then let's add climate engineering on top of that. That's poisoning the forest with toxic rain, killing soil microbiome, killing root systems. That's why so many trees blow over every time the wind blows. Their branches are brittle and breaking because their hydrology is breaking down inside the trees for all the same reasons. The beetles take over eventually, but that's only a symptom. And we have all official agencies saying, oh, the beetles, the beetles, the beetles. That is not the core problem here. None of these people are telling the truth. From that report, as hot and dry and disastrous as the last few years have been, it appears that the chaos caused by a warming planet is just getting started. Yeah, that's an understatement. In fact, the fuse that's been burning is now hitting the dynamite itself. Keep that in mind. Non-linear equation. The report then says it's pretty bleak. That's an understatement as well. They say episodes of climate whiplash, rapid swings between wet to dry and dry to wet conditions, are also growing more frequent and intense. That is absolutely a result of climate engineering, weather warfare operations. That is the hallmark of these operations, drought, deluge scenarios, and let's add the chemical ice nucleation, thus the baseball, softball, and now cantaloupe-size hail. Search Lake Michigan ice balls to see what happens when they chemically nucleate over a big body of water. Take a look at the pictures. Don't believe me. Please don't believe anything I say here. Never asked anybody to believe me. I've asked people to investigate what we disseminate at geoengineeringwatch.org. From earth.com, scientists identify 2 global ocean bands heating at record rates. I'll get to more specifics on some of these issues in a moment, but I want to cover some of the wider horizon headlines to give a bigger picture. Why is it so dire that the oceans are heating? Because that is the biggest heat sink on the planet. That is what has been absorbing so far most of the heat generated by industrialized, militarized society. It's a heat engine, period. And consider that a cubic meter of seawater can contain 4,000 times the thermal energy of a cubic meter of air. And profoundly, none of the so-called largest scientific panels created on any subject in human history, like the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, They don't consider any of this. They don't consider the methane building up in the atmosphere. Everything they say is fictitious and not in the direction of what most people would like to believe. Most people cling to the belief that everything these massive climate science panels state is alarmism, is worse than it actually is. The exact opposite is true. What they have tried to do is point out some problems while completely masking the true severity and immediacy of what's unfolding, which also covers the tracks of the climate engineers, all the so-called climate science conferences, not about changing business as usual. They're about forcing countries to actively or passively participate in the climate engineering weather warfare insanity. That's what they're about. This report says oceans are absorbing more heat than ever before. Researchers indicate that the waters have gained warmth at an unprecedented rate, and the shift affects weather patterns and marine life. Of course it does. Nothing lives in ocean temperatures that we had off the coast of Florida not very long ago of 102 degrees. 102. Killed everything. That's the same temperature Jacuzzi recommends for their hot tubs. Of course nothing lives in that, and they act like could be a little bit of a problem here, you think? For the record, as stated previously in this broadcast, if we calculate the total thermal energy buildup on planet Earth right now, including the oceans, it's somewhere north of the thermal energy contained in 13 Hiroshima nuclear bomb blasts per second. That's somewhere north of 1 million a day. Quick math on that. And again, climate engineering, aka weather warfare, in the attempt to mask the true severity of damage already done to the planet, much of it paradoxically from these programs in the first place, not the only source, but major core source, and in the attempt to use weather as a covert weapon of war, all of which further fuels the overall meltdown of the planet. It doesn't mitigate it, and we still have the so-called climate science community pretending that if things get bad enough, we might have to deploy climate engineering to save us all from ourselves. How's that going so far? Again, almost none in academia or matrix media is capable or willing to tell the truth. Exactly the same is true within the ranks of the political circus of the absurd, regardless of the party. The few exceptions to all of this know who they are. I am very grateful to each of you. Power structures won't be able to hide the broken planet reality from populations for much longer. The moment the majority of the masses realize the loot, plunder, pillage, and pollute planetary party is over, it really will be. Collapse of the grand illusion that was never sustainable in the first place, not even close. The proverbial dominoes will fall at blinding speed like a tornado in the night. As the gravity and immediacy of what's unfolding becomes impossible to hide, the manipulators of the matrix will play their hand, much bigger cards, and they hold many. They, the money printers, the true seats of power on the prison planet, are now more desperate and dangerous than ever before. So many of the factors that have so far facilitated the current unsustainable paradigm are already so far past the breaking point that on any given day, the controllers could, for example, include much more lethal pathogens in the atmospheric aerosol spraying operations. What do you think those hundreds of biolabs around the world are doing? Exactly. The elements of which include already being sprayed, lab test proven, polymer fibers and graphene, both of which are used militarily for biological carrier platforms, aka cloud-to-ground pathogen transport. How long can you hold your breath? Next, more climate engineering cover-up from criminal so-called journalists. From the New York Post, Louisiana lawmakers push to ban, quote, chemtrails, citing conspiracy theory claiming exhaust alters the weather. I don't know any legislators, and I'm working with many, that are claiming it's exhaust. That is the false official denial narrative, not fact, that anybody with a functional set of eyes can see with the film footage we have at geoengineeringwatch.org. Nozzles visible, retrofit nozzles visible on the wing pylons aimed in the exhaust jet stream to make this look like, quote, exhaust, which is anything but. Dispersions turning on and off. Patented processes. The patents for these mechanisms are shown with crystal clarity at the very beginning of the geoengineeringwatch.org documentary, The Dimming. Again, patented mechanisms for exactly this type of dispersion. Let's stop there about this New York Post report. Let's summarize this pathetically transparent article and so many more like it from Matrix Media. It is an increasingly desperate attempt to cover the tracks of the climate engineers and to ridicule any that dare to admit to the climate engineering elephant in the sky. More on the same theme from a different direction. From MIT Technology Review, Trump administration has shut down more than 100 climate studies. This is an ongoing story, getting worse all the time. To any that are trying to convince themselves that shutting down ecological monitoring is somehow a path to MAGA, Make America Great Again, or MAHA, Make America Healthy Again, it isn't. It's about desperately trying to hide the full extent of damage already done to the planet from countless forms of human activity, with climate engineering at the top of the list. It's about hiding climate engineering, aka weather warfare. How many are still holding their breath in the false hope that this administration or any other would actually take steps to halt the weather warfare? Really? Is that in any way a rational hope? Not so much. Has there been any mention of climate engineering operations in any meaningful way or context from this administration or any other? Short answer, no. Just the head of the EPA, Lee Zeldin, trying to blame the two balloon-launching Silicon Valley clowns as being geoengineering that he was going to go after, as if that mattered, never said anything since, and the head of HHS stating that it's only the jet fuel, translation, we are only seeing jet exhaust in our skies. Both narratives are mass distraction and disinformation. No other mentions made that I'm aware of. No surprise whatsoever. For the record, it's up to us. We are the ones we've been waiting for. Those who control the printing of money control climate engineering. They also control who occupies the White House and who doesn't. They control matrix media. They control the scripted political circus and the primary actors in it, whether or not those actors are even aware of the part they are playing in the mass distraction dramas. The highly covered public divorce, political divorce this week, of the starring actors in the theater of the absurd, political theater of the absurd, is a case in point. All scripted drama, all intended to captivate the masses, to keep their eyes from the wider horizon, from the ongoing train of total collapse. And for those still clinging to the notion of the stock market will save us from ourselves, think again. It's nothing other than a card house Ponzi scheme of mass delusion and distraction. And for those that still believe that all these so-called economic experts that make all kinds of claims about future economic everything have any clue whatsoever, they don't. No clue. None. Biosphere collapse is, always has been, and always will be the bottom line. When the web of life collapses, so does everything else, aka civilization and the whole of the human race. On that note of slap-in-the-face reality, this is Dane Wigington. You're listening to the weekly installment of the commercial-free, non-political Global Alert News Report, the End of the World as We Know It broadcast, brought to you by Geoengineeringwatch.org, the largest and most visited website in the world on the subject of global climate engineering operations, aka weather warfare. Moving on, another form of warfare, tectonic weapons, which do exist. These are frequency transmission weapons, and the conveniently timed catastrophic earthquakes that are inseparable from political occurrences. Here's another example from phys.org. Satellite data reveal electromagnetic anomalies up to 19 days before 2023 Turkey earthquake. Imagine that. Anomalies in the ionosphere, including measurements of parameters such as electron density and electron temperatures. Clear and striking anomalies at 1 to 5 days before the earthquakes. Been over this at geoengineeringwatch.org, done a report on this. This is not nature. This is tectonic weaponry. Please see the reports at geoengineeringwatch.org on this. I just wanted to make mention of this. It's another form of environmental warfare. From the UK Daily Mail, apocalyptic aerial hazard the size of U.S. barrels toward Florida, triggering public health warnings. A massive plume of dust the size of the entire U.S. is moving across the Atlantic and is set to hit Florida this week. Experts warn that it can make breathing difficult, especially for people with asthma, allergies, or other respiratory issues. Is there anybody that doesn't have those at this point? Because we're all breathing these highly inflammatory particles, not just pollution, not just dust, climate intervention elements to the tune of conservatively 40 to 60 million tons of nanoparticles annually. Because the report states it carries fine particulates that can irritate the lungs. No can. It does. Some people are stronger than others. They say this year's plume is different. Listen to this. As it is earlier, denser, and more concentrated with higher levels of fine particles. Imagine that. Couldn't be from those jet aircraft circling over the top of that plume and dumping their payloads, could it? It also prevents tropical waves from forming during the Atlantic hurricane season, which runs June 1st to November 30th. Keep in mind as the hurricanes come, patented technology can make or break those storms anytime they want. It's not a matter of how the storm was spawned, because nature can certainly do that with boiling oceans, but what happens to it after? And the ability of the weather makers to make or break those storms is scientifically inarguable. Lots of toxic elements involved, but they certainly can and are. Keep that in mind. From grist.org. The smoke from Canada's wildfires may be even more toxic than usual. Imagine that. Again, couldn't be anything to do with those jet aircraft dispersions over the top of those smoke canopies, could it? This report says a legacy of mining means that toxic metals could be carried along with plumes of smoke. And never mind the patented climate engineering processes that include those toxic heavy metals. Never mind the peer-reviewed science study that's already proven that coal fly ash is being used as a base material which contains lots of toxic everything, including metals, including radioactive elements. Ignore all that. It's just something that is being picked up from the ground by the fires. And there's a lot of toxic elements in that too. I'm not denying that. But when we have time-lapse footage of these aircraft dispersing grid patterns directly over the smoke canopy, whatever that's about, it's nefarious, period. More than 200 wildfires are blazing across central and western Canada now, most of which are out of control. Not an accident. From AccuWeather, Canadian wildfire smoke and dust plume from Africa could collide. Listen to this part. Over the south this week. The collide part is what you need to listen to. As if the massive canopy of toxic sprayed out smoke and the massive plume of toxic sprayed out weather system wind pattern manipulated dust from Africa is not toxic enough. They want to combine the two. The report states the African dust cloud could collide with smoke in the south this week, potentially causing unhealthy, not potentially, that's like saying again, jumping off a 100-story building and using the asphalt to break your fall could potentially be harmful. Yeah, you think? And they end with this. They say, although the sky will be duller and dimmer, there'll be colorful sunrises and sunsets. How wonderful. That will make up for all of it, I'm sure. From atmosphere.copernicus.eu, large smoke transport from Canadian wildfires reaches Europe. Think about that. You need to look at the smoke cloud mapping from these fires and how much real estate it's covering. This is absolutely being used as a form of geoengineering, solar radiation management. Yes, they are that desperate to destroy what's left of the planet's remaining life support systems, ensuring that no one gets out alive in order to temporarily and toxically mask the true severity of warming on our planet. That's how insane the controllers are. From Barron's.com, Canada and U.S. warn of air quality hazards as Canadian fire smoke reaches Europe. That's a parallel story from CTV News. Wildfires burning out of control across Canada. From CBS News, Canada calls for international help to battle massive wildfires. So, with all the trees going up in flames, ending up as toxic smoke in the atmosphere, what are we going to do? Saudi Arabia will save us. From the UK Independent, the Middle East's journey to 50 billion trees. From that report, announced at COP27, again, the COP climate conferences, smoke and mirrors, and behind closed doors, they're forcing countries to actively or passively participate in climate engineering. But they say, this report states, Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's ambition to plant the equivalent of 6.5 trees for every person on Earth. For the record, that's 50 billion trees. For the record, this headline and stated goal is just more total delusion from the oil-pumping billionaire. Just like the currently under construction but never to be completed so-called city of Neom, it will never be completed. Total collapse, everything, everywhere, all at once will come long before they get anywhere near that finish line. And Neom is another epitome of human insanity as the planet's life support systems implode on every front. Search and view current exposés on the city of Neom construction. You'll understand. Even all the existing megacities around the world will very soon be silent, decaying monuments to the Anthropocene epoch, aka the age of man. Translation, the age of total omnicidal insanity. And those who don't believe it, those who believe after watching Back to the Future we're all going to be riding around on hoverboards trying to escape the antics of Biff, not going to happen. From Reuters, Drought bakes China's wheat belt, slashing harvests. That's one snapshot. There's so much more around the globe. From extremetemps.com, another insane warm night in Russia. 78.8 degrees in Kazakhstan near the Arctic Circle. That's in Siberia. Think about that. Almost 80 degrees at night in the Arctic Circle in spring. And people are looking at the engineered winter chemical mayhem here in the U.S. Still happening right now. I'll get to that. Winter storm warning this week in Wyoming, I believe, while we had record-breaking over triple-digit temperatures on the East Coast, West Coast, South. Winter storm warning in Wyoming. Chemical kind. From NASA.gov, spring heat wave in Iceland. Yeah, but there's a winter storm warning in Wyoming, right? That's what so many people focus on. If it's cold outside their door, or they see a headline from somewhere that's anomalously cold, chemically cold, they use that to fortify their denial. That is such a common human trait. Doesn't matter even if where they're at, it's incinerating and burning to the ground. They just cling on to some little nugget of nothing to fortify denial. From the UK Met Office, double record breaker. Spring 2025 is warmest and sunniest on UK record. From Le Monde.fr, in Switzerland, after a glacier collapsed onto Blatten, fear is gripping the mountains. Why? Because the permafrost is thawing and the mountains are literally disintegrating. If you haven't seen that avalanche that happened in Switzerland, take a look at the video. It is shocking. From German mainstream media, severe weather hit southern Germany on Sunday. Massive hailstorms and fires everywhere. Massive hailstorms. Massive hailstones as well. Does anybody remember that this was never the case historically? And now it's absolutely everywhere? Moving on from Reuters. Scorching summer threatens grids and crops across 3 continents. North America, Asia, and Europe will likely be pummeled by record heat. The report then states the western and central U.S., along with the western and northern Europe, are at risk of sustained high temperatures. Again, for the record, it's not a could, may, might equation. It's not could be at risk. It's a given. Wherever there's not enough moisture for the weather makers to chemically nucleate, the temperatures will be through the roof. This is the Thelma and Louise moment. Through the guardrail, flying through the air, the human race being the occupants of that car. You can pump the brakes all you want. That car's going to the bottom of the canyon. Will anyone survive the ride? But what about this from AccuWeather.com? Northeast to cycle between deluges, dry air, following summer-like warmth. This is the whiplash scenarios I've talked about so many times over so many years. While not the chilly, rainy weather of late May or the dry, warm weather of early June, the Northeast will flip back and forth between nice weather and drenching storms into mid-month. The same high-pressure producing record heat in the Northwest will arrive in the East. Think ionosphere heater-induced high-pressure heat dome. That's how they steer the upper-level wind currents and thus moisture. Will arrive in the East by the end of next week. This will allow the temperature pattern to flip-flop with much above average temperatures returning to the region. And we have the so-called experts on Matrix Media TV absolutely clueless or lying about all of this every single day. I don't know how they look themselves in the mirror. I truly don't. So how's this for contrast? This week, again, while all-time record triple-digit temperatures were being shattered in many places around the U.S., winter storm warnings, Wyoming. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. A reminder of the how of such ridiculously wrong and unnatural meteorological equations, which for the record is the result of global climate engineering operations, weather warfare. High pressure heat domes, western and northern U.S. Clockwise rotation. Picture like a pulley under the high pressure heat dome, around the high pressure heat dome, rotating clockwise. All the moisture rotates up and over that, bypassing the west. Commonly done. That's on the schedule now for more incinerating of the west, likely setting the stage for more western U.S. forest fire incinerations because they're desperate to put as much particulate matter in the air as they can. It's coming. You can bet on it. So with all that in mind, let's add this piece of the puzzle. From KFSK Alaska, May brought record-breaking rain to parts of Alaska. That's exactly what I'm pointing out. That high-pressure heat dome rotating all the moisture that would have come into the west, California, Oregon, perhaps Washington, goes up and over that. Into where? Alaska. If not for the atmospheric manipulation of precipitation patterns, where might that rain have ended up? The western U.S., where there's crops that need growing. On that note from the New York Times, it's not just poor rains causing drought. The atmosphere is, quote, thirstier. From that report, higher temperatures caused by climate change are driving complex processes that make drought bigger and more severe, new research shows. The Times report then states, a hotter world is a thirstier one. What aren't they telling us? The laws of physics make clear for every degree C of warming, the atmosphere holds 7% more moisture. Based on unfiltered frontline data, we appear to be past 3.5 degrees C of warming now. That's a little south of 7 degrees. It should be raining much more overall right now, but it isn't. Why isn't it? Because there's a factor in the equation we're not being told about. That factor is climate engineering, not just the desiccant particle atmospheric dispersions, toxic elements, but also the frequency transmission manipulations, the kind that put a crushing high-pressure heat dome over the U.S. West, pushing all the moisture up through Alaska, spins around that clockwise rotation of the high-pressure zone and back down into places like Wyoming, where there's a winter storm warning with triple-digit heat records being broken around the rest of the country. This is not benevolent operations. This is weather warfare. Let's add more puzzle pieces about failing crop production around the world. Again, it isn't just a lack of rain and toxic rain. In fact, when it does fall, killing soil microbiome and root systems, there's also the following alarming fact to consider in regard to the crops that do make it to harvest. From numerous sources, USDA drops rules requiring farmers to record their use of the most toxic pesticides. Well, there you have it. Making America healthy again by the now unchecked, all-out use of the most toxic pesticides. So much for MAHA. Further, remember and consider MAHA everything means absolutely nothing unless or until the global climate engineering toxic atmospheric spraying operations are fully exposed and halted. And no, it's not jet exhaust sprayed payload dispersions. Period. Irrefutable data to back that up. From Earth.com, scientists determined that major Earth systems are on the verge of total collapse. That doesn't sound good, does it? I'll get to that in a moment. You're listening to the weekly installment of Global Alert News, the Bad News Broadcast, installment number 513, June 7th, 2025. This is Dane Wigington, your host. Global Alert News is brought to you by Geoengineeringwatch.org, the largest and most visited website in the world on the subject of climate intervention operations, known as geoengineering. Global Alert News is aired on numerous AM and FM stations around the country. If any radio station near you is willing to air the GAN broadcast in order to inform their listeners of what Matrix Media won't mention, have them contact us at admin@geoengineeringwatch.org. We'll grant them access to our weekly broadcast for free, of course. Recordings of the commercial-free, non-political Global Alert News broadcast can be found on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org under the recent column and on the Dane Wigington YouTube channel. If you're on our email list, please put us on your email contact book so that our mailouts don't go to the spam files. Please help us to share the groundbreaking documentary, The Dimming, which fully exposes the climate engineering atrocities, now well over 26 million views and rising rapidly. Thank you for the help distributing this A to Z tool on exposing and halting the climate intervention insanity. Best way to share: circulate the direct link to The Dimming by email directly from the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. Sharing directly helps us to overcome social media censorship, of which there is plenty. Hard to find anything from geoengineeringwatch.org on Google. They've done their best to hide it all. When viewing our YouTube of The Dimming or Global Alert News or any other Geoengineering Watch video on YouTube, please subscribe, share, and comment. All of this helps us to circulate critically important data to a much wider audience about reaching those that even now still aren't looking up. They're looking down at their electronic appendages. Here's one way. Start a conversation with Geoengineering Watch awareness-raising materials. They can be found on our homepage. Our only goal: provide activists what they need to move this fight forward. Extremely high-quality printed materials, full-color, shocking images, picture worth 1,000 words. We pass these printed materials on for less than our overall cost of producing and shipping. Keep that in mind. One goal at geoengineeringwatch.org: expose and halt the insanity in our skies. We have new Geoengineering Watch hoodies, Geoengineering Watch shirts, including blue shirts now. Photos are on our homepage. We have scannable business cards. Very effective, that tool, especially bumper stickers. all effective tools to help strike up a conversation on the climate engineering issue. Reaching a critical mass of awareness is the great imperative of our time. We must beat the controllers to this intersection before they're ready for it to happen. If we can expose it, we can stop it from the inside out. We must awaken our military brothers and sisters, families of defense industry personnel. They are literally participating in their own demise. If you're willing to share a picture of yourself with a Geoengineering Watch shirt or hoodie, ideally in some crowded location, please send your photos to us so that we can post it as part of our activist compilation. That's part of our materials page. The images do encourage others to make their voices heard in this all-important battle to sound the alarm. There's no place to hide on the Titanic. No safe place. Hiding in your cabin will not save you. The only solace is to be on deck doing everything possible to keep this ship afloat. That's an effort that will take all of us. And on that note, to all those that are steadfastly committed to exposing and halting the climate engineering insanity, my absolute deepest gratitude to you now and forever. Moving on. As mentioned a moment ago from Earth.com, scientists determined that major Earth systems are on the verge of total collapse. Actually, for the record, we are already in free fall. The report states heat records fall so often now that most people barely look up from their phones when the news flashes across their screen. Yet every fraction of a degree matters, because hidden in that extra warmth are hair trigger switches built into Earth's systems that are critical for all life on our planet. I certainly agree with that. Scientists call that domino effect a tipping cascade, and it means one regional change can snowball, not can, could, may, might, will snowball into worldwide trouble in a geologic blink. Where have I heard that before? So many times on this broadcast. Grim arithmetic sits at the heart of a new study led by scientists from multiple organizations. Now, let's get on to the disinformation from this report. An even grimmer scenario, they say, where temperatures peak near 3C, we're already past 3.5C now over pre-industrial, for gradually declining. Why would they decline at that point? It's a runaway event. They say resulted in a 45% chance of triggering a permanent shift by 2300? What planet are these people on? We have blown past the planet's barriers already. We're in free fall already now. This is a go back to sleep, nothing to see here report. What a pack of total delusion that conclusion is. Let's put this into perspective. The human race is behaving like the kamikaze from the 100th floor that thinks he's actually flying. The conclusion from the Earth.com report would have you believe that the sidewalk swan diver who's already hurtling past the second story, next stop the pavement, will magically slow down and make a soft landing on the asphalt somewhere off in the distant future. Good luck with that. Global ecological collapse is kicking in the front door right now. On that note, from the UK Guardian, half the tree of life, ecologists' horror as nature reserves are emptied of insects. Geoengineeringwatch.org, first major source to report this in 2012. Why did it take the whole of academia, so-called academia, so long to tell the truth? Because now they can't hide it. From this report, a new point in history has been reached, entomologists say, as climate-led species collapse moves up the food chain, even in supposedly protected regions free of pesticides. They continue, those who doubt there is sufficient species data to prove the, quote, insectageddon can now track it by proxy via sharp declines in birds, lizards, and other creatures that depend on them for food. Cascading collapse, that's what this scenario is called. Let's add this. More recent research from the U.S. found a decline in 3/4, 75% of nearly 500 bird species. Their collapses, not just declines, with the steepest downward trend in the stronghold areas where these species once thrived. We are neck deep in the 6th great mass extinction on the planet, happening faster now than any time in Earth's geologic past, which makes it exponentially worse. From the UK Guardian, let's get on to our oceans. Marine heat wave found to have engulfed area of ocean 5 times the size of Australia. It's going to be a dead zone. Think about that. 5 times the size of Australia. Canfield Ocean. More on our dying seas. From AccuWeather, record sargassum seaweed in Atlantic Mexico beaches covered. They say record levels of seaweed in the Atlantic are moving west and have already hit Mexican beaches, coming to Gulf Coast beaches soon. This is hydrogen sulfide and ammonia emitting algae that will also contribute to the dead zones, along with the scaldingly hot water. Back to the smoke from PBS, Canadian wildfires. Forgive me for jumping around a bit. There are so many headlines. There's dozens I will not get to in this broadcast. I'm giving a snapshot of what's happening around the world, but it's time to look up and face the oncoming train. Standing in the middle of the freeway at rush hour with your back turned to oncoming traffic won't save you. You need to face traffic. That's what this broadcast is about. Reports as a photo from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration satellite showed a broad swath of the smoke pouring down through the Midwest U.S. into North Florida. All the way to Florida from Canada, all the way to Europe from Canada. It's not an accident. And in specific regions, they push that smoke down and hold it on the surface with ionosphere heater-induced high-pressure zones, making it extra toxic for the population that lives there while they blanket spray on top of those smoke banks. And let's consider where it's kept cool. Again, let's add this. Regions in New York and other parts of the Northeast have had rain 13 of 13 weekends, while we can't get a drop in the West for the reasons I cited. High-pressure heat dome forcing rain up and around us, clockwise rotation into Alaska, record rain there, back down into the U.S. where they keep the most populated portions of the U.S. with enough moisture that they can chemically nucleate. Sure, lots of big baseball, softball, and now cantaloupe-sized hail in certain places, but unfortunately, even alt media sites, with the exception of geoengineeringwatch.org, are not attributing this to climate engineering. Why is that? Why is it that so-called sources and sites that pretend to be fighting climate engineering also pretend that the chemical cooldowns are nature? They're not. Then there is the "it's just jet exhaust" crowd, those that, for reasons we can speculate on, are doing their best to cover the tracks of the climate engineers and their jet-sprayed toxic dispersions. Up close film footage, nozzles visible, dispersions being turned on and off, patented processes, decades and decades of patents, government documents. The data to confirm that what's happening in our skies is sprayed payload dispersions is mind-numbingly irrefutable. So if someone tells you it's jet exhaust, you know you're dealing with someone who doesn't really want to know the truth, or at least for you to know the truth. From USA Today, summer 2025 forecast calls for overwhelmingly above normal heat starting in June. The summer forecast calls for the hotter than normal temperatures from coast to coast. That's according to NOAA's Climate Prediction Center. Really, that's according to Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, which do all the modeling for National Weather Service and NOAA, the agencies that have a blanket agency gag order, not a specific gag order on geoengineering, which some use to discredit the whole gag order scenario. Of course, they wouldn't do a gag order specifically on geoengineering. How big of a red flag would that be? It's all agency operations, and it is real. It does exist. Private defense contractors doing all the modeling for the nation's weathermen because the script has to match. So, bottom line is that thermal energy buildup I mentioned before, you can't hide it. No amount of chemical ice nucleation is going to hide the total thermal energy buildup on the planet. Ozone layer perilously close to functional collapse. You can feel the intense burning sensation of the sun, the hot surfaces below. It's much more effective at heating bodies of water as well. That we have the deoxygenation happening from superheating fresh water as well as salt water. We are in a very, very precarious place. What we face is far more dire and immediate than almost anyone yet understand. This report says, according to multiple outlooks, summer 2025 will be a scorcher. Wait till 2026. How many will make it that far? I can't imagine we're going to reach the end of this year without big cards being played. It's not like you wake up overnight and the planet stops supporting life, but once the power structure can't hide the emptying out food shelves and the severity of what's unfolding, before the population panics and we have Mad Max times 8+ billion, they're going to do lots of big bad things. You can bet on it. From the economictimes.com, America's about to boil. Summer 2025 forecast warns of relentless coast-to-coast heat with no cool relief in sight. We're on track for what's called Venus syndrome. I've been over that so many times. Let's look at this from Bloomberg. Highways baking at 158°F signal a red-hot summer from China to the U.S. Expanding their horizons on that one, aren't they? From newscientist.com, the global temperature may be even higher than we thought. Researchers have proposed a more accurate way to calculate the global surface air temperature. It's called telling the truth. That's the more accurate way, which suggests we are just 3 years away from breaching at 1.5. We've already blown past 3.5. Total disinformation here, but how many times over how many years in this broadcast have I said it's not as bad as we're being told? It's exponentially worse than we're being told. If you don't believe that, You will soon, I'm sorry to say. I wish I was wrong, but I'm not. From Medium.com, the poles won't hold. Current warming is their death sentence. When we lose the cryosphere, we lose the planet, at least the one we've known. Climate engineering, in an attempt to mask what's happening in the polar regions, has only further fueled the overall fire, destroying what's left of the planet's life support systems in the process. This report says what seems like a distant crisis isn't confined to distant shores anymore. The entire cryosphere, every glacier, every ice sheet is becoming unrecognizable. Greenland is hemorrhaging mass. West Antarctica is destabilizing in ways that scientists warn might be irreversible. There's no might. It's irreversible at any time frame that matters. Even if we stopped emissions today, again, Thelma and Louise moment through the guardrail, can't just pump the brakes and come to a stop. All of that I've said so many times, academia now beginning to admit to it because they want to tell the truth? No, because they can't hide it anymore. Moving on, from AlaskaPublic.com, as glaciers melt in Alaska and Canada, fishing and mining advocates alike see opportunity. Yes, the pirates filling their pockets with loot, or they think they're going to, on the deck of a sinking ship won't matter at all. From LifeScience.com, it's like trying to grow a tree in an oven. Gold mining is sucking the Amazon rainforest dry. They're poisoning it with mercury to mine the gold. They're cutting down the trees, the lungs of the planet. From phys.org, young trees face make-or-break moment as drought reshapes Europe forest. Single greatest drought-causing factor, climate engineering. Rain, when it does fall, is toxic, killing soil microbiome and root systems. As I've already pointed out in this broadcast, my own efforts here, I could plant 200 to 300 trees in a day. Plugs, they're called, genetically adapted to this area. I would have a 95% success rate for about the last decade. Zero. Zip. Nothing. Nada. How is the Saudi oil sheik going to plant 50 billion trees? All total delusion. Planet we've known is gone. It's done. It's not coming back in any time frame that matters. What matters now, can we save any part of the planet's life support systems? And if we can, that's worth fighting for. We have an obligation, an absolute obligation to do so, to our posterity, to every life form on this planet that doesn't have a voice without us. There's solace in that. Face that storm head on, and you will never regret it. From GB News, UK weather. Freak polar cold front sparks incredibly unusual phenomena with snow forecast. Think about this. Warmest and driest May on record in the UK, and now they're going to get snow in the middle of summer? Really? Welcome to the Climate Engineered Orbiting Asylum. From globalnews.ca, 6 gray whales found dead in San Francisco Bay Area in less than a week. The report goes on to say the authorities just can't figure it out. They just can't figure out, with the food chain collapsing, with oceans superheating, deoxygenating, functional ozone layer collapse, which is killing the plankton, the base of the food chain on the planet, toxic everything. They just can't figure out why marine life all over the globe is dying and washing up on beaches. Canfield Ocean, again, look it up because that's exactly the path we're on. From phys.org, most freshwater game fish in Southern California carry invasive parasites capable of infecting humans. Study finds gets worse. More than 90% of popular freshwater game in Southern California contain an introduced parasite capable of infecting humans. In some cases, the parasites have caused strokes or heart attacks. Now let's go fishing. What a great idea. And lest we forget, every single fish on planet Earth, freshwater and saltwater, now contaminated with PFAS forever chemicals, along with a plethora of other toxins, including climate engineering elements. On another note, a breaking headline that deserves to be pondered deeply from Newsweek: U.S. vetoes Security Council resolution for Gaza ceasefire. The report states the U.S. was the only Security Council member nation to vote against this week's measure, which called for humanitarian aid to be allowed to resume in Gaza. Imagine that. Question: is it not yet clear who the tail is that's wagging the dog? As the saying goes, if you want to know who is actually in control, ask yourself who you're not allowed to criticize ever for any reason. Those who control the money control militaries, control climate engineering, control conflict and carnage zones around the world. How could it be otherwise? Controller-orchestrated collapse isn't just coming, it's here. If you think those in power care any more about you than they do those in Gaza, think again. From the collapse of industrialized civilization, human extinction from the unthinkable to the imminent. The possibility of human extinction, our complete disappearance as a species, has become a defining anxiety of the 21st century. This is not merely a product of scientific speculation or dystopian imagination, but a reflection of profound shifts in how we understand ourselves, our place in the cosmos, and the relationship to the biosphere. The rise of industrial civilization with its unparalleled technological and economic power has not only brought prosperity, but also created new pathways to our own annihilation. Today, here and now, extinction is no longer a remote abstraction. It is a real and pressing concern, intimately bound to the ongoing collapse of the biosphere and the contradictions of our industrial and militarized so-called way of life. So, what now? Personal inner growth occurs in degree with the depth, meaning, and purpose of the life mission we individually choose to accept and undertake. What we choose to do in the time we have been given will echo through eternity, as the proverb goes. Choosing to do nothing is also a choice, the forever wrong one. Can we yet make a difference at this late hour? How can we possibly know unless we try with every fiber of our being? And that includes properly prioritizing our remaining time, energy, and resources. Each of us, all of us, individually. That means pushing to preserve some part of the planet's remaining life support systems for our posterity, which, if we remain on the current course, will never be. The first and most important leap we can collectively make in the right direction is to fully expose and halt the completely out-of-control weather warfare. This effort will take all of us. If we can accomplish that, many other challenges and forms of human destruction to the planet will have to be fully faced. One step at a time. We must deal with the biggest hole in the bottom of the boat first. Look up. There it is. Our toxic, jet-sprayed, filth-filled skies. And no, it isn't jet exhaust. And if you hear anyone peddling that patently false official denial of climate engineering, ask them why they are contributing to the cover-up of omnicidal planetary spraying operations. Lab tests, film footage, and peer-reviewed published study proven operations. Email the link to the dimming to every source and individual possible. Ask them to investigate while there's still time for it to matter. Check the activist suggestions link on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org for additional instructions and input on how you can help to move this fight forward. Making our individual voices heard isn't just an option, it's an absolute obligation. It's our collective efforts that can still make a difference at this late hour. Stand strong. Never yield to the fading of the light ever. Until next week, this is Dane Wigington with Geoengineeringwatch.org.